Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to From Our Corner of the World, Seattle's solidarity against South African apartheid. Yeah, this program is produced in partnership with MOHI's longtime organizational partner, the Black Heritage Society of Washington State. Yeah, big round of applause. I'm Rachel Spence, and I'm the Public Programs Manager here. Currently, MOHI is hosting Mandela, the official exhibition, which hopefully you got a chance to see upstairs, and if not, it will be up till September 7th, and we hope you can come back and see it. This exhibit was produced by Round Room Live in partnership with the Royal House of Mandela and the Royal House of Mandela Investments. It also contains a portion on local anti-South African apartheid organizing, curated by MOHI staff member Anthony Long. Give a wave, yes, and a round of applause. And it is those local stories that we will be uplifting tonight. Before we get started, some housekeeping notes. Bathrooms are past this tower, down the hallway, and on the left. There's also a bar in the back with libations, should you choose, and some water. There's also a water fountain by the bathrooms. And our store is open in the back if you want to peruse it on your way out. Also, we like to remind folks that if you need to get up and move around, please feel free to do so. You can go stand in the back, take care of your body as it needs to be taken care of so that you can learn all the wonderful knowledge you're about to hear. So tonight, we're going to be hearing from local activists who organized in international solidarity with Indigenous people in South Africa. And it's important to acknowledge and be in solidarity with the Indigenous people of this place, the Duwamish, Suquamish, Muckleshoot, and all Coast Salish people. Historically, Native communities were forcefully removed from the city, but today we honor their continued existence and endurance with deep respect and gratitude for their unbroken stewardship of this place. We encourage you to do your own research and visit the websites of local tribes to learn about whose land you are on and how to support their sovereignty. I'm now going to turn it over to those who you actually came to hear from and introduce our wonderful moderator, Vivian Phillips. Vivian Phillips is a communications professional and arts leader. She founded and launched Art Noir online in May 2021, and in September 2022, opened a physical space in the historic Central District. And if you haven't been there, you should visit it. Specializing in Black art and retail products. Vivian led the art plan development and a community-based artist selection panel for Midtown Square. She is also co-host of the arts-centered podcast, Double Exposure. And with that, Vivian will introduce the panel tonight, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you all for being here. My gosh, I don't know if I would have come inside. But I'm really happy all of you did. And I just want to say up front that MOHI has to be one of my favorite museums. One of the reasons is because of its longstanding history with the Black Heritage Society. So thank you to everyone for being here, and thank you to MOHI. I want to give just a little bit of context before I introduce our guests, just a few facts. Apartheid is a word that translates into apartness. And the apartheid rule by the National Party of South Africa took formal hold in 1948 and is rooted in the Dutch and British colonial processes of removal, land seizures, and oppression. And in 1948, the population of South Africa was over 13 million, white, colored, Asian, and Black. the Black population numbered 68%, or close to 8 million. And anti-apartheid movements in the United States date back to around 1953, largely aided by Paul Robeson's involvement in the American Committee on Africa. And the Seattle Coalition Against Apartheid got its start in 1984 and persisted into the early 1990s when apartheid was finally dismantled. So this evening, we have an opportunity to have conversation with the folks who I describe as having had their boots on the ground. And I do want to say that there are many, many complexities related to anti-apartheid movements. We will never get into all of those tonight, but hopefully we'll be able to get into some of the most salient points around Seattle's role in an international movement against apartheid. And this evening we are joined by two individuals, beginning with Lynn Wilson. Lynn is are you a retired civil rights attorney?
Sort of.
Okay.
A little.
I understand that
retired.
part. I understand sort of very well. And she was with the National Lawyers Guild, who was involved in the late 80s push to divest Seattle City's pension funds from South Africa. She was also one of the founding board members of the Seattle Daliwe sister city community. And if I recall correctly, Daliwe is from the Xhosa language and originates in parts of South Africa and some other parts of the region. And I'll ask you to explain what that means when we get into it. Ms. Wilson also went to South Africa in 1996 for a month to monitor the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where she met Nelson Mandela. Please welcome Lynn Wilson. And I would never say that this person needs no introduction, because I think it's always, always appropriate to introduce Eddie Rye, who's been involved in the struggle for racial, economic, and social justice for, it says, the last 50 years. But Eddie, I know you just turned 83, so I'm gonna say that's probably closer to the last 70 years. He is the current host of Urban Forum Northwest Radio, 1150 AM on KKNW. And Eddie's activism includes the historic effort to rename Empire Way to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Way. And I will also say, just because I know this, that Eddie was also instrumental in having King County's name changed from the name of a former slave owner to Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. County. Eddie is also, if you didn't know this about him, he is a whistleblower, and he blew the whistle loud on the purchase of illegal South African stone that was purchased by King County Metro. If you all, any Seattleites here, anybody been around for a while, you remember when the tunnel construction got shut down because they were using South African stone? Well, thanks to Eddie Rye. Welcome, Eddie. Thanks in large part.
Thank you.
There is another panelist who could not be here this evening, and hopefully she'll get a chance to see this. Her name is Mariama Givens, and she is a retired teacher who taught in Moses Lake in the First Place School in Seattle. She was co-chair of the Coalition Against Apartheid, representing Seattle and the Pacific Northwest, and organized for the better part of the early 80s and early 90s with her daughter Zena, who unfortunately passed away. Ms. Givens was a core organizer of the protest outside the home of South African Honorary Consul James Swing. So, in absentia, please say hello to Mariamu Givens. So I want to start by asking you, Lynn. One of the things we talked about earlier before this evening was the significance of coalition building. How did the Lawyers Association really lead the way in building a coalition to protest apartheid in South Africa?
Thanks so much. I'm really honored to be here tonight. And I guess the way I would answer that question is that the National Lawyers Guild did not lead the coalition. It really was led by the grassroots organizers. And I really am just, I'm forever grateful that I got to participate in that effort, because I could never be a different kind of lawyer who dictated how things were supposed to go, because that's not how we did things. And I know Liz Schott, who's sitting in the front row here, she was also one of the National Lawyers Guild attorneys there. And I learned how to be an attorney through Arthur Kanoy, some of the other attorneys that he represented Fannie Lou Hamer in the civil rights movements in Mississippi. He was an attorney for her, and he learned that kind of the hard way, is that you listen to what people's needs are and what their issues are, and then you be a lawyer around that. So it was an amazing experience to do that in Seattle. There were so many grassroots organizations, the entire church community, the NAACP. I'm sure Eddie remembers more than I do some of the other groups that were involved in it, but they led the way. And he was one of the first people arrested at the South African consulate before the coalition actually formed. But it was an international movement, and we were just there to serve people. We were just servants. That's what we did. And it was an amazing experience to do that. So maybe Eddie can talk a little bit more about what the coalition itself was.
So how did you all then get involved? I mean, what was the impetus or the catalyst for the National Lawyers Guild to become involved in an anti-apartheid movement?
I think I didn't get involved until after law school, so it wasn't until 1988. And at that point, and that's how I know Eddie, at that point they were focusing on divestment from pension funds, from any government monies that were invested in the companies. And there were huge companies that were in South Africa, the Shell Oil Company, huge companies. And they were paying, the black workers in South Africa made just pennies compared to the other people, the white workers. So it was a huge issue. And so that's how I personally got involved in it. And then the protest started in 1984 because the movement at that point was to shut down the consulates. And a lot of cities had already succeeded in shutting down their South African consulates, but we did not. And so the mayor at that point was Charlie Royer, and he actually wanted the South African consulate shut down. And then the protest started in 1980, at the end of '84, and went on for about 18 months. And once every Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock, sometimes 800 people showed up at this guy's front porch, and police presence. And I recently drove by the house where it was his residence. So
is that in Montlake?
It's in Madison Park.
Madison Park.
It's a very exclusive part of Madison Park.
Broadmoor?
No, we
couldn't have gotten into the protest in Broadmoor.
I don't think we would have gotten in there, but it's a pretty high-end part of Madison Park.
Yeah.
And then the street is very narrow, and so it's pretty amazing that all those people got themselves in on that street. So it went on every single Sunday for like 3 or 4 hours, started at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and went till about 5. And anyway, we could talk later about the organizing, but it was very strategically planned. Every single protest was and the lawyers were just there to serve and to be helpful.
To provide people with their rights.
When they got arrested, and then there was a group of lawyers who, it wasn't just the Lawyers Guild, it was a national conference of black lawyers, other just individual lawyers who believed in the cause. And represented, everybody got an attorney.
So Eddie, you, as I understand it, you were part of the original protest, and I think Larry Goss said you and he may have gone to jail a couple of times as protesters. But what drew you, besides the fact that you are just by nature, I think, an activist, what drew you into this particular movement? Did you know much about apartheid in South Africa prior to 1984?
Yes, I did. I was friends with Julian Bond, who was the founder of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and his father was a college president he had left Tennessee, and his father became a college president in Pennsylvania, and he went to a Quaker boarding school. So from the 70s on, I got apprised about what was happening in South Africa. Also, in 1984, I was a campaign manager for Reverend Jesse Jackson, and I got sent Anthony a picture of Julian Bond and I at the Jackson campaign headquarters, and that's when he was talking to people involved in the campaign about how to get the anti-apartheid into the platform of the King County Democrats at the state convention. So that was very helpful as well. But in 1984, I was in November, I was watching TV and I saw members of the Congressional Black Caucus being arrested at the South African Consulate in Washington, D.C. So I said, well, you know, we have one here, let me go on down here and see what's happening. So I went down, I was talking to Joseph Swing, who was the so-called honorary consul general, and talking to him on the door. And he said, I'm gonna call the police. I said, go ahead and call them. So when he called them, one police car came up and another person left a demonstration, I think it was the Freedom Socialists, came up on the porch as well. So as it turns out, about 6 police cars came, we were handcuffed, and we were really fortunate because there was a white female officer who was been the treasurer of the Black Law Enforcement Association for the Seattle, and so she kind of mellowed things out for everybody, so there was no great deal of tension. But we did get handcuffed and go to jail, and a member of the National Lawyers Guild came and got me out of jail. And then when I went to court, I thought it was Liz that represented me. She represented so many, but I thought it was her. But anyway, the judge dropped the charges, and so we just started pursuing things. And like a lot of things, you know, I mean, it was a widespread movement. My friend Rick Harwood had some members of the Jewish community protesting in front of the council on Christmas Day. We had Reverend Dr. Robert L. Jeffrey, pastor of New Hope Missionary Baptist Church. He and Mike Mann built a shanty in front of Boeing to protest Boeing selling planes to South Africa. And Boeing tried to have them removed, but they were on city property. So, you know, you mentioned the granite. After Norm Rice, on the Seattle City Council, Norm Rice and County Councilman Ron Sims, Metro was not under the county at the time. It was an independent regional entity.
Right.
But they got them to adopt a policy where they would not purchase any goods from South Africa or invest in any companies doing business in South Africa. So I get a call from an African-American contractor, Stan Saloy Sr., masonry contractor. He said, Eddie, I thought Norm Rice and Ron Sims had a policy passed they wouldn't buy anything from South Africa. I said, that's right, Stanley. He said, well, I got $500,000 worth of Bertie Fontaine right here. It's only found in South Africa. So we raised the issue to some folks, and they said, oh, it came from Italy. It might have been shipped from Italy, but it came from South Africa. So anyway, I got attacked by the press for costing the taxpayers $500,000, which I gladly accepted because we made them get rid of the granite. So that was one thing. And then you walk down the street in front of the King County Courthouse, here's some steel bars with big USA stickers. You look real close, Union of South Africa. So, you know, there's a lot of contradictions going on in terms of the entire movement.
So I guess I'm really kind of curious about, as one of the things that it stands out for me about the Seattle Coalition and the national movement is that it was not just protest. It was really about hitting South Africa in the pocket. It was a financial kind of resource protest. How did that strategy get developed?
Well, you know, we had a lot of people who were like Lynn's group, the National Lawyers Guild. They did like all the stuff on divestment. We had many people working in different areas. Clergy had certain responsibilities. I mean, people just came together like a quilt. Different colors, different interests, but one interest we did have, and that was rid South Africa of apartheid. So it was really amazing. And then the other thing is the children of the affluent property owners down in Madison Park, they started checking it out. So a lot of them got an education. A lot of them became very progressive later on in life because of the fact they knew it was wrong. Everybody in the world knew it was wrong. And right now, we could be headed back to apartheid USA style.
Right.
With the way things are going.
Well, you know, one of the things that I think is really interesting about apartheid, too, is that slavery was a blueprint for apartheid. And the Jan Smuts, and the other founders of Johannesburg, Johan and Jan, really looked at slavery as a model. Were you all aware of the fact that there was so much of a blueprint for what was happening in South Africa that had already happened in America?
Well, they had 246 years to study it. I mean, African Americans, African descendants of the United States enslaved chattel slavery probably contributed more to this country than anyone else. 246 years of working from can't see to can't see. Somebody come take your wife, sell your family. Folks got dressed up to watch black folks be hung. So, I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
And yet we went and died in every war, you know, and then came back home to segregation and degradation. 1.2 million African Americans came home from World War II with no veterans benefits. So when you look at us economically, we've been shortchanged all of our lives.
I wanted to.
Sure. And then I have a question for you.
All right. So I just wanted to say something about the movement part of the movement being economic sanctions and going after the economic aspect of apartheid, because it was there from the beginning. And I just recently read a book written by one of Mandela's attorneys during the Rivonia trial, and there's in the exhibit upstairs you'll see there's a reference to the Rivonia trial. He was charged with conspiracy to commit sabotage, which was an automatic death penalty. And they had enough, there was no question that, I mean, he didn't even, he was guilty. I mean, he knew that they had enough evidence to find him guilty and impose the death penalty, but they went to trial. And one of the things that was really interesting is that the entire international community wanted to have the charges drop at that point, and at the end, the judge almost had no options. They had to impose the death penalty. At that point, under apartheid, almost any crime, it got worse later, but a lot of pretty minimal crimes that we would consider like felonies, but burglary and some other crimes were, the death penalty was automatic. And the Secretary General of the United Nations apparently called the judge the night before the sentence was going to be imposed. And all the defendants knew they were going to be given the death penalty. Mandela, they all knew. They were prepared for being hung. And the judge was informed that if you do that, the entire international community is going to impose sanctions on you. Because they're not going to sit back and just let that happen. And so he gave them life sentences. And that was a significant achievement. It was the international community that threatened economic sanctions against apartheid. And that was 1964. That was many, many years before this. And so it's always been part of the movement, and it was very strategic. So it's a part of the story that isn't told. So
Thank you. So Lynn, you spent a month in South Africa during the Truth and Reconciliation. It was 1996. Right. So apartheid ends in 1994. Some say apartheid ends. I say apartheid continues, but you know, semantics. What did you witness? I mean, I've actually visited the drill hall where the Truth and Reconciliation trials took place. And it's an interesting and kind of grim sight. What did you learn about the truth? Because Mandela became president in 1994. Right. What did you learn about the Truth and Reconciliation project or process that we've not seen happen before, and I don't think we've seen anything like that happen since. What was some of the most interesting points of that witnessing to you?
Wow. That was really an amazing experience, and it was also an international group of attorneys from all over the world. Europe, South America, Argentina, Indonesia, Jamaica, Trinidad. It was just we were there to be legal observers. And so the opening ceremonies were in East London, which is on the Atlantic Ocean side. And I attended the victim hearings, and another Lawyers Guild attorney attended what they called them the perpetrator hearings. And under the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, if some of the white police officers or other military, South African military had committed crimes, murdered people, basically, tortured and murdered people, they could they could basically get amnesty for their criminal activities under this commission if they admitted in detail what they did and basically apologized for it. And a lot of the victims, I'll never forget the very first hearing that we went to, and it was Archbishop Tutu. It was just an amazing experience. I mean, I really think if we had had something like this in our country, maybe it wouldn't have made any difference. I don't know, because I know South Africa still has tremendous problems. But in the ceremony, in the hearing room, there was a row of there were some attorneys and the commissioners, and Archbishop Tutu was the chair. He was in the middle, and then we sat behind the people who were testifying, and they had a counselor that would sit behind them because it was so traumatic to even try to remember what they had experienced that if they started breaking down, the counselor would just like wrap them in their arms and hold on to them. And the first person to testify was a man who was brought in a wheelchair, and he started describing the torture that he had suffered. He also, before he even described it, Archbishop Tutu asked him, who was your attorney at your hearing? Because they would be put in prison, they would get 5 or 6 year sentences for not having their pass cards and going out of the township that they were in. If they were 2 blocks outside and they didn't have their pass cards, they could get us, Mandela was a lawyer before he was in prison. So he represented a lot of these people. And this man was tortured, and he completely collapsed. And as he's talking, you looked up at the panel, and Archbishop Tutu was just sobbing. And they had to shut the hearing down because people just couldn't, they were just so overcome with the emotions of it that they had to shut the hearing down for the rest of the day, and the rest of us. So there was something about that whole idea of a compassionate place to deal with just the brutality, the unimaginable brutality of it, that was just so, it was really one of those amazing experiences. So it was also hard to come back to Seattle.
I'm sure.
I did not want to come back.
I just want to ask both of you, kind of around sustaining a movement like this over a long period of time. Eddie, can you speak to what that took?
It was dedication, and it was broad-based support. You didn't have to rely on the same people going to jail every Sunday. Me and Larry didn't go to jail every Sunday, every other Sunday. But anyway, the most important thing is you had labor unions, you had clergy, you had student groups, you had the National Lawyers Guild, you just had the black firefighters. I mean, it was just a broad-based, the doctors. It was just a broad-based support. It was like anti-apartheid movement was like contagious. Mm-hmm. And then it spread to the high schools. And it became a conversation. Well, the college students were already involved, but the high school kids were talking about it. The middle school kids, because people started bringing their children to the protests, which I thought was very unique because they need to be educated, and that was a parental responsibility I was glad to see people live up to. But that was just a broad base of support. Like I know Is anybody in here involved in any of the protests at the South African Council? If you stand up, please. I see you, Cindy and David.
Broad coalition.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's great.
Yeah. You know, here's the
We'll have
thing
a
that I think is,
demonstration next week. Y'all show up.
here's one of the things that's so fascinating to me, and it's not like I'm, new or anything like that, but I'm just thinking about how we organize today. It's all done electronically. And, I think back to 1980s and phone trees and just putting out the information and relying on people to show up. I think also, how was it communicated to people what the direct actions would be besides just showing up and holding a sign?
Well, today we could go to jail. Might have the National Guard. I'm just saying. That's the climate right now in this country.
Yeah.
So Lynn reminded me earlier, she said, what we did back in the 80s, if we did that today, we might be in jail.
Absolutely.
Not with no plastic handcuffs either. So, but that's the environment we have right now. But once again, the anti-apartheid, people could see, they knew it was wrong. People knew it was wrong.
Right.
And it spread to the younger set, and that was really important. Not just the OGs, but the students, the college students, the high school students, and every person of every aspect of life.
Well, what do you think made South Africa so different? Because most of the nations, the African nations and nations in the African diaspora, had been colonized by the French, by the British, by the Dutch, but there was something about South Africa that made it so significant for the world, essentially, to come together to say this is not okay.
Because we could see it. We could see it. And even like slavery, there was no, nobody could cover that. It was all by word of mouth and maybe some print. But with South Africa, by people actually seeing the conditions that blacks were being subjected to, being brutalized and stuff like that, when you can actually see that, a lot of people in our country do have compassion. And that's what motivated these people to show up every Sunday. That's what motivated the Lawyers Guild to work on the divestment campaign. That's what motivated Reverend Jeffrey to build a shanty in front of Boeing. So, it's one of those things, and I hate to say it, but we're going to have to do some of the same things again, not only for South Africa, but for the US of A.
I also think that it was a very clear, specific goal. It had one goal, and that was democracy. And Mandela was the focal point and the leader. And it was just that focus, because it was just this one focus, was to bring democracy and equal opportunity to everybody in the whole country. And so it was, it was a morally justified. There's no doubt about it. There were no doubts. And the other thing is that we won. We just came, the consulate shut down. We won we got the pension fund divested. Even though that was a big fight too, because the retired employees sued the pension board saying, you can't do that because we're going to lose money. And it turned out that if they divested, they actually made more money by divesting. So we won that, and Mandela was released from prison. He didn't die there. People in South Africa were dying. The activists were dying. The attorneys were dying in South Africa. Some of the attorneys died from letter bombs and.
Well, the Soweto uprisings were pretty brutal as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to meet Nelson Mandela. Did you meet
I did.
Nelson Mandela as well?
I flew down to Oakland. I got invited by Congressman Ron Dellums to go down to Oakland. When he came down there, I met him down there.
But Lynn, you met him here in Seattle when he visited,
No,
or
I
you met him in South Africa?
In Cape Town. So before the East London hearings, there was an international, a conference of international democratic lawyers, and actually Liz Schott was the one who suggested that I could do that, and so I went, and it was about 50 lawyers from all over the world, all over Africa. We had a French interpreter, all over from Eastern Europe. There were about 50 of us, and he was president then, so it was in April of 1996. And like I mentioned before, he was an attorney before he was sentenced to life in prison. Right. And I guess he was a really good attorney, and he loved it. So he had a whole team of lawyers that represented him in the high treason case that ended with a life sentence. But so he wanted to meet with us, and so he met with us, and it was just an incredible experience. I will never forget being in that room with him. And the one thing I remember he said, and I think the thing that was just so amazing was just after 27 years in prison, he had not even a hint of bitterness or negativity. And he said that every single morning he woke up and he was filled with joy for the people of his country, all the people of his country, everyone, the white, everyone. And he did not start out that way. So that was just an incredible experience. And it really, really emphasizes what a global movement this was, that these attorneys had come from all over the world. And some of them had suffered from discriminatory practices in their own countries. So just to be in the same room of a person who was that just completely freed of anything that even a hint of bitterness. And it was just an amazing experience.
So before we go to questions, I want to ask each of you, what is the most memorable thing that you took away from this particular Seattle Coalition Against Apartheid movement that you have carried into your activism life? What are some of the most salient things that you learned from this? That protest works? That attorneys need to be on site when you're protesting?
I think where you have a justice-loving people, it's easy to organize around injustice. And I think that was one of the things, because you could see, using South Africa for example, you could see that. Like right now, you can see what's happening in LA. A lot of Americans don't stand for injustice. And a lot of people who voted for the current administration did so, and I don't know why, but their votes are coming back to bite them.
Yeah.
So I would say the most important thing is when you have goals or positions or programs that's going to uplift people. I think you have a lot of people in this country, regardless of race, that will step forward when you're doing something for humanity.
Yeah.
And I try to surround myself with people who care about people.
Right on. Lynn, what about you?
Well, I just think that the just participating in a lawyer capacity in a group of people that were so committed. I mean, there were a couple of people who come to mind that aren't here tonight. Marjorie Prince from the Church Council. The Church Council was also but it was a spiritual experience. It was not just a movement. I mean, for me, that was a spiritual experience. And I couldn't come back to just being a corporate lawyer somewhere. I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And I also really learned a lot about just working with people who, and I've been on, for 27 years, I was on the board of Mothers for Police Accountability, which was this whole other, right. Issue. And just learning how to just be there and being supportive and being a lawyer when you're asked. And kind of just not getting in there, just sort of pushing your own, and then allowing yourself just to be surprised, and to just it's a miracle, a mysterious, total spiritual miracle that all that happened. I mean, it could have gone so bad. The other thing is just bringing it to today, the role of the attorneys in having the rule of law being respected by those in authority. I mean, whatever you want to say about the South African government during that time, there still was a rule of law. You could still go to court, you could get a lawyer, and you could, push back against the system through the legal system. And if we lose that, we're just, if we don't have an independent judicial system, if we don't have lawyers that get in there and fight when it's necessary, I don't know where that ends up. And so the importance of actually doing that was really the other part of it.
Did you get a sense that Nelson Mandela was fully aware of the international movement against apartheid? I know, Eddie, it's funny because I'm remembering I was in South Africa and we did a simulcast. I broadcast live with you from South Africa, and one of the questions you asked me was, do people know that Seattle was involved? And I was like, people don't even know Seattle. So, they don't. so no. So I'm just curious, did you get the sense that, there was that real level of awareness that this had not just been a European movement, it was an international movement and greatly involved people who looked like folks in the majority in South Africa?
We had a lot of stars that were opposed to South Africa, white movie stars, we had athletes, we had, but not mention a lot of the politicians, Congressional Black Caucus, but also people who were for human rights, who were in Congress and stood up. Right. So I would say that there was a lot of support.
Yeah.
A lot of support. And I think that because of not having to go to the church house to the meeting to hear what's going on, we didn't have the social media we have right now, but we did have television, we had the black press, we had radio, KYAC.
I remember that.
I know you do. We remember you too.
Yeah. So we've got a little bit of time for questions, and I do want to encourage you to please use the mic if you have a question, because this is being recorded, and if you don't use the mic, your question won't make it into the recording.
Larry Gossett's in the front row.
Larry Gossett is in the front row. Larry, what words of wisdom do you have to share with us about your participation in the Seattle Coalition Against Apartheid? Y'all, before you speak, let me just introduce you correctly. Former president of the Martin Luther King County Council,
yes,
Larry Gossett, representing District 2.
Seattle Black Panther Party, remember?
One of the issues around apartheid that comes up a lot for me and audiences with whom I'm speaking in recent months and years, in recent years and months, is this issue of wealth differences between blacks and whites. And during the apartheid movement, you used to hear frequently the average white family in South Africa makes 15, 16, 17 times the income and has the wealth because they stole the land from the African people. And they own 70% of all the land. And the wealth differential is just monstrous. But today, in Seattle, Washington, the wealth differential between black and white households is as follows. The average, and the FYI guy in the Seattle Times did an article on this in 2021. But the average wealth for white families, white households in Seattle, Washington today, 2021, 22 to 25, is about $436,000 for the average white household's wealth in Seattle, compared to just $33,000, the average wealth for black households in Seattle, Washington. And that's monstrous. It actually surprised me, and I was in the movement to do away with apartheid way back when Eddie and Vivian and everybody up on the stage was involved. So the reason I think that this is important for me to share with you all, and that you to know, we need to figure out a way in terms particularly in light of the fact that the current president has said that no way that we ever going to allow people to give legitimacy to anything like diversity and equity and inclusion. That's democracy, but it's so few Americans that ever challenge that point. But it would be easier if people knew about the wealth differential in many urban communities in this country, and that it's worse than it ever was in South Africa. Even now in South Africa, when our president was meeting with the president of South Africa a couple of weeks ago, they had one of the reporters on MSNBC say, you know, he's glorifying these 60 white people that came over here from South Africa, about 63 of them, and saying that they were being attacked, genocide was being imposed upon them, just lying.
Yeah.
But not too many people got upset about it. So we got to try to put these kinds of facts together, and if we do, we can beat back the movement, the authoritarian movement that's going on in our country right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I know the first time I visited South Africa post-apartheid, some of my extended family that lived there, they were so excited because people were becoming thousandaires. Not millionaires, but thousandaires. That meant that they were finally earning a wage that could support them. And that's so sad. So I really appreciate your comments about the economic wealth gap. It exists around the world, apparently, for folks like us. Questions?
Hi. I have two questions. The first question is around local landmarks. So are there any local Seattle landmarks that are commemorating what happened here in support? And if not, maybe this is something that different groups can maybe organize around? So that's the first question. And then I really liked a lot of your points, just in general. But I did have a question around the divestment. So when divestment was happening, was there like a divestment reinvestment into something local? So maybe if you could say more about when you divested or when you helped push for the divestment from South Africa, especially for, like, you talked about the granite or the stone, where was that money then filtered to?
Thank you. That was only 2 questions. Oh, I thought you said you had 3. All right, so the first question is, are there any landmarks that are an indication of what took place here? Maybe the Black Heritage Society is working on that. I don't know. Maybe I could just throw that out there. And the second question has to do with, was there any effort to reinvest what was divested from South Africa back into local causes?
We got, as long as the investment wasn't in South Africa, that we were satisfied. That's our main objective was to make sure that local government entities and also private corporations divested from any interest they had in South Africa. And that was it. Now, we didn't pick any other company or anything else. We just said, get the hell out of South Africa.
So single issue,
Yeah, I think
single focus.
it was single focus, and also, surprise, surprise, a lot of these companies and government agencies lied about, whether they actually did it. And so it took a lot of effort to get the information about what was actually happening. So to the extent we had the resources, that's kind of where we were focusing on. And I know in the pension fund divestment case, that did happen, where they said they were doing it, and then we were able to get the information that it actually wasn't happening. So, but that's like, we've obviously, that was 40 years ago, so we've evolved. And, I think if we were doing it today, if there's a divestment movement today, that makes a lot more sense to also focus on that, too.
Are you aware of what American companies are still invested in South Africa, deeply invested. Have you spent any time kind of tracking that over time? I know Coca-Cola has an incredible
I stopped
presence
checking everything
there.
out when Mandela was freed and was elected.
It's
So,
true.
and I just said, right now, if the black folks are in charge, they better take care of business for themselves.
Well,
Okay.
yeah. There was a question right here, and then
there.
back, and then there. Great.
Thank you so much for everything this evening. I actually have two questions. One, though, has mostly to do with language. The fact that those hearings were called Truth and Reconciliation. We were going someplace as a global message around what needed to happen for resolution. And I was much younger. I was in Chicago. I was not in Seattle at the time. But since Mr. Rai, you're involved in the press, are there things we could be doing or should be doing that would change our trajectory in terms of people's understanding and people's involvement? Are there ways that we could be messaging around what democracy could look like and what democracy is? Because we're not hearing. It challenges me that if I turn on a national evening news broadcast, I get 1.5 minutes about what's going on in Los Angeles and 45 minutes of how somebody turned 88 today. It's only a half-hour broadcast, that doesn't matter.
What are you watching?
But just to go back to the question, I had the privilege of doing a tour of Robben Island, and years later hearing people remember with grace how they as a nation, even though they were in different states and statutes and roles, were all working toward truth and reconciliation. And I'm just wondering, is there anything we might do today to help today's generations understand differently where we need to go?
That's a great question.
That is.
Vivian?
Vivian, you can answer.
Well, part of what I hear kind of underlying in there is reconciliation means something. You have to reconcile in order to reconcile, correct? So I think that the conciliation piece might have happened, but the reconciliation in South Africa really never happened. If you're going to reconcile, that means that there's going to be a redistribution of wealth and land and all the things that were taken, right? That hasn't happened in South Africa. So the question then still stands around, are there things that we can do to help draw a better picture of what true democracy looks like? Did I get that right?
And I'd like to say that the governor signed a proviso of $300,000 to start a reparations study. It was called the Charles Mitchell Reparations Study. Charles Mitchell was brought back here from Maryland. He was a slave, brought back to the Olympia, Washington area when he was 12 or 13. And during his task, he hooked up with some brothers operating a steamship out of Victoria, BC. So they finally convinced him that you'll be free if you come with us. And so he jumped on a steamboat, and his slave master did file a lawsuit, and the Canadian government and the judge told him where to go, that he was now a free boy. And two women wrote a book called Free Boy. And so the reparations study will be the Charles Mitchell reparations study, because Puget Sound was Underground Railroad. Okay, a lot of folks came from California through the woods. I don't know how they got through Oregon, because only blacks in Oregon had to be slaves, and that's why George Washington Bush, one of the founders of Washington State, when he came up this way, instead of making a left to go to Oregon, he made a right and came to Washington. So we have a history about, we were involved with slavery in this state, even though people say, well, there were no slaves there. Yeah, there were. Okay, so I just wanted to let everybody know that's happened, so we will see what will happen, because according to Dr. William Doherty Jr., economist at Duke University, he says that each individual who was a descendant of slaves in Washington State, regardless of age, not household, would be between $350,000 and $400,000 each. That's what he said. Now, to me, that would have been the most important piece of legislation that the Black Members Caucus should have sponsored. But we did, Senator Hasagawa put $300,000 in the Senate budget, and Mia Sue Ling, Gregerson Dahl put $300,000 into the state budget. So we got some people we need to talk to during this session about where somebody's priorities need to be.
Well, while you're doing that, I mean, you have a platform, a radio program, and you are very politically astute and very politically involved. So I think that part of that question is asking you to push harder. Push harder. Help us stay abreast.
All people got to come together to make sure we have equity, equality, and fairness and democracy in this state.
The Portland City Council just this week voted in favor of providing reparations to Black families who were displaced from the Albina district. So it's not impossible.
That's discrimination, that's not reparations.
Well,
reparations for chattel slavery only. Because somebody signed a deal, they're going to have a deal for Black homeowners who were here since 1968. That's remedying past discrimination. That is not reparations.
Okay.
So some people get that confused, and I don't let elected officials confuse that. That's right, Larry. Reparations has to do with chattel slavery. It does not have to do with discrimination.
Okay.
There should be compensation for past discrimination, redlining, and everything else, but it's not reparations.
Okay.
It's payment for past discrimination.
All right. Well, we have another question. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm actually from South Africa, and I grew up in South Africa under apartheid. And I can really say that, in the 80s when I was a student, that it was that combination of internal and external pressure that really led to the changes that happened in the early 90s. And that knowing in South Africa that there was so much support from the outside world to end apartheid was really what kept people going. And I didn't know that Seattle had played such a big role in that, so everybody who did, thank you so much. My question, though, is there were so many different groups that came together. Religious groups, lawyers, students, labor unions, all fighting for this one certain goal. And today in the United States, we're in the most tumultuous times that we've had maybe since the 60s. And we don't see those groups coming together. And I'm trying to understand why.
That's a really good point. I don't know, was there a question in there, or was that more of a comment?
The question is, why aren't these groups coming together like they have done in the past? The students, the unions, the religious groups, all fighting towards what's clearly a common goal, which is to maintain democracy.
Either of you want to comment?
Well, it hasn't happened yet, but it doesn't mean it isn't going to happen here. So we're just now trying to get acclimated to basically what appears to be an attack on our own democratic system, where 50% of the population decided to impose what is not really a democratic system on. So I don't know what the future is here, but it's a lot more complicated now. It's a lot more dangerous. When we were doing anti-apartheid protesting in 1985, at that point, the African National Congress was listed as a terrorist organization by the federal government. Nelson Mandela was listed as a terrorist. You could not do those kinds of protests now because of the laws that have changed, and they're using some of those laws going after the protesters, pro-Palestinian protesters, and there even was a Supreme Court case that attorneys who give advice to groups that support listed terrorist organizations or listed terrorists can be held liable under these pretty oppressive laws. So we couldn't do that now. Or no, I take that back. We could do it. It's just a lot more complicated, and it would just young people. It's like I don't know the answer, but young people do. I believe that.
Do you get the sense, though, that I mean, oppression in the United States is not new. And people watched all over the world when black people were being beaten and had dogs, sicked on them. And there was not the kind of international support. It feels to me like the world is watching us, but the world is not supporting the 50% of the United States citizenry that's against what's happening right now.
I think, so just thinking about this, is in South Africa you had 70% of the population who were suffering under increasingly it's hard to imagine the brutality of it every single day. And I mean, half the children in the black areas, 50% of the children died before the age of 5. Think about that, 50%. So, and they had no say they had no way to influence what was happening. And we do.
Yeah.
We voted to put this in place. We have democracy, so it's just a whole different situation.
Yeah.
It's just we have a democracy if we can somehow muster the willpower to keep it going.
I think at the end of apartheid, the average age of the populace was somewhere between 15 and 35. Because most of the elders died.
So we have to go back really and look at our own history in this country. We talk about what was happening in South Africa. The same thing happened to black folks over here for 246 years.
Yeah.
And they don't want it taught in schools. They don't want the truth told. Right. But we had 246 years of apartheid.
Yeah.
It was called slavery. So, I mean, and folks don't want it to be taught, but it's part of our history. Black history is American history.
That's true. Do we have another hand? Esther Mumford. Let's go to Esther. Okay.
Leading anti-apartheid activist, Esther Mumford.
I'm sort of fixated by that.
Go ahead and put the mic right up to your mouth.
Okay, I'm sort of fixated by the sign that Mariam was holding, showing radical women's involvement. There were a lot of passionate women that were involved in Seattle in the movement. And I just wanted to name two because neither one is with us any longer. They're both deceased. One of which was Selma Waldman. Right. And this is
she was great.
An example of her wonderful work. And I think there's an archive that has been formed of Selma's work, which I certainly hope so. Another woman was Charlotte Lewis, who was a Portland African-American woman. And much of her work has been destroyed, but there are still murals and other work in public collections that are available for viewing. But those women brought their talent and their hearts to this movement. And I just wanted to mention their names tonight.
Thank you. I think I heard Mona Bailey's name as well. She was involved at some point. All right, we've got a question.
C.C. Beckwith was another key organizer.
And who was that?
C.C. Beckwith.
Cecilia Beckwith, of course. Go ahead, all the way in the back.
Hello, everybody. My name is Anthony Long. I curated the local component upstairs on the anti-apartheid movement. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to just underscore what you highlighted in Selma Waldman. Really, this story came about by when I was tasked to curate this local story. Just a simple Google search, and Selma Waldman's collection came up, which is actually digitized in the Michigan State Archives. Also, okay, and also
walk and talk.
Also, you can go to Seattle Central Library and you can see her collection as well, and it has a whole bunch of those flyers, a lot of photographs, but just her collection. It identified what Eddie Wright did, what Larry Gossett did, what so many others did, what Lynn Wilson did, and that was just the treasure in this journey that I took that really helped put this story together. So I just wanted to underscore that and just show that there is a record of it, and it all is because of Selma Waldman held on to it and donated it before she unfortunately passed away.
I just want to, while you've got the mic and you're up here, so the exhibit, as I understand it, is a traveling exhibit. and it was organized by the grandchildren of Nelson Mandela. Tell us how we got so lucky to be on the tourist stop. How did Seattle get on that tourist stop?
One thing we did, we like to elevate a local connection to show that history is really connected through our community and throughout the globe. And this was a perfect way to show it, and showing how our city is so deeply connected to Nelson Mandela through this movement that we're learning about right now.
And I just want to ask, anybody in the audience in 1999, did you all get to see him when he was here? Larry, Esther, one other person? All right, well, thank you for carrying that torch forward. I do want to ask if Stephanie Johnson Tolliver would like to give us just a couple words about the Black Heritage Society's role in both this exhibit and in archiving Seattle's local connection to the movement.
Okay, Vivian. Hi. I am just really excited to be here this evening, and again hear Eddie and Larry and Lauren, and just really wonderful to hear from you this evening. Being a partner here at MOHI for more than 40 years, the Black Heritage Society supports programming like this, and when I heard that the Mandela exhibition was coming and that the Seattle component was going to be in Anthony Long's hands, I knew that we were going to be in for something really cool. So if you didn't see the exhibition before the panel, I don't think it's open after, but you'll have to just come back and take it in. And there was the question about landmarks and the movement. So just quickly to say that, no, there are some venues here in Seattle where there were organizing and movement. So Washington Hall, Langston Hughes, places where people were organizing our landmark buildings and places. But, let's think about it.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I think we're out of time. Actually, we're a little over time. And I have to acknowledge Cindy Domingo. Don't get up and leave. I see you doing that.
Yeah, all the members of the anti-apartheid.
Cindy Domingo, who...
Yeah.
Can you tell a short story? But let me introduce you first. Cindy Domingo was Larry Gossett's left and right hand for a very long time at County Council, and she's also the wife of the late Gary Owens, who is probably at the top of the activist list. So nice to see you, Cindy.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to tell a short story about when Nelson Mandela came to speak at Seattle University. And Robert Free, who many of you know, Mandela was speaking, and Robert Free went to the front and had a banner that said, "Free Leonard Peltier, our Nelson Mandela." And of course, the Seattle Youth Security and Police moved to arrest him and to take him out. And Nelson Mandela said, "No, please do not do that," and let him go, and talked about Leonard Peltier. He understood the relationship and the importance of Leonard Peltier. The other thing, one of the first peoples that he thanked when he was freed was the Cuban people, because it was the Cuban people that sent soldiers to free the countries in Southern Africa. And he wanted to go visit and thank them personally after he was freed.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I hope that the exhibit, because it is a limited exhibit, encourages you to go learn more about South Africa. One of the things that is most endearing to me whenever I visit the country, which is pretty often these days, is that even the youngest child knows their history. A 7-year-old speaks 7 languages at minimum in South Africa and knows their history. So I hope that when you see this exhibit, you will be curious enough to go learn the truth and know that only 6 farmers have been killed in South Africa in the last 5 years, and 5 of them were black. Find that out. Go do that work for yourself. Thank you so much to Mohai for hosting the event. Thank you for hosting us this evening. Thank you all for being here.